We are going to do this in line. It is not the oldest to the youngest, but it is, I would never say that, otherwise I'd be somewhere in the line, but not at the youngest end. Chief Chadwick, thank you.
Thank you.
We have our final panel member here.
Please do not tell my police department that fire had to come and escort me in the building.
We won't say anything about fire versus police. You know how this works out sometimes. But the way this is going to work, I will go down the line. We will get to everybody on the panel having a chance to do their talk. And then we will take questions from the audience. Please wait till the end for your questions. Write them down if you don't think you can remember them. That's fine. Make a note. But I think you can probably remember them. Just to introduce our panel, we start with Bob Blankenship. He started out wanting to be a cop, but was instead hired by the city of Henderson as a firefighter in 1963 and was assigned to the original fire station known as Station 1 at 134 Atlantic in the historic Henderson area. He was acting fire chief for a little over 2 years and retired in 1991 as battalion chief. As he told me, he wanted to get back into, he wanted to get back to fighting, back into the trenches, as it were. And he did mention that their department all worked quite hard. That would make some sense as a fire department. I think both departments probably do. Next on the panel is Don Griffey. He joined the fire department on July 6, 1970, and dedicated 35 years of his life to the department. And he recalls the day of the Petcon explosion fairly well. I think anybody who was here probably does. I'll never forget that day. He was one of the first to arrive on the scene. At that time, he had been a fire captain for 5 years. And after he retired in 1988, he started his own business and was founder of DNR Hydrant, which is based in Henderson and is still working today. Yes. I have to point out, by the way, DNR Hydrant did not supply the first hydrants for the community of Henderson, which is good because we had the last one of those first hydrants at the county museum. You can come out to the museum and find out that if you're going to cast into a cast iron fire hydrant, the name of the community your hydrant company is in, please spell check what you're casting before you do that, because it is misspelled on the fire hydrant. Just a little aside. Okay, next on our panel is Frank Belger, who joined the fire department in February 1974 and retired as a fireman engineer in 2001 with 27 years of service. He grew up in Henderson, attending the schools in Henderson, and graduated from Basic High School in 1965. And next to him is Chief Scott Vivier. I almost got it. He has impacted the department by implementing innovative initiatives such as paramedic training programs and emotional first aid and peer support. Earned Bachelor of Science degree in Emergency Services Administration from Utah Valley University and a Juris Doctor from the UNLV Boyd School of Law, and holds a number of records for jump roping from fifth grade. See, I couldn't help myself. That's just way too cool.
We have jokes now. Get ready.
Now, moving on to City of Henderson Police Department. Our first speaker is Tommy Burns, who was born in Culver City, California. Another native son. Very good. As am I. but not from Culver City. I'm sorry, I'm San Diego. And his family moved to Henderson when he was 6 months old, so he remembers a lot about Culver City. As his dad was in the hotel business. He has lived in Henderson 71 years. He's been married to his wife Terry for 36 years, and they have 2 children, Catalina and Thomas. Tommy became a police officer in September 1974, served in a variety of areas of the police department, including patrol officer, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and was sworn in as chief of police in September of 1994. He retired on October 1, 1999. After retirement, Mr. Burns served as security director for various casino properties and is currently, I can speak, I know I can, and is currently a security consultant. Next is Jim Goff. The Goff family moved to Henderson, Nevada in 1953 when Mr. Goff's dad, a carpenter, moved from California, sensing a certain pattern here, to rebuild all the barracks at Nellis Air Force Base. Jim attended 6th grade at Burkholder Junior High and attended basic high school. He was a member of the state championship team in 1959 in basketball. Jim met his wife Roberta in 1960 and they were married in December of 1960. They will be celebrating their 63rd wedding anniversary this December. They have 1 son, Jimmy Jr., and daughter Christy. Jim attended Nevada Southern University, of course today's UNLV, and started up on the Henderson Police Department in 1964. Jim worked his way up through the ranks and had many titles from patrolman to chief. He was named chief of police in 1984, where he served for 10 years and retired in 1994. He had a fishing guide business on Lake Mead, which he operated through 2018, when he had to give it up because of macular degeneration. After 35 years of guiding fishermen on Lake Mead and the Colorado River, as well as spending 3 years as a writer for The Sun, wrote the guidelines column in The Sun. Jim has had many titles, but his favorite titles are husband, dad, and grandpa. And last but not least, we have Chief Holly Chadwick. Chief Chadwick was appointed Chief of Police on May 1st, 2023, and joined the Henderson Police Department in August 2002. Chief Chadwick was raised in Las Vegas and attended the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where she earned a Bachelor of Science degree in athletic training, a Bachelor of Science degree in sports and fitness management, and a master's degree in kinesiology. It's a great word, isn't it? Kinesiology. I always like that one. Went on to get her doctorate in public administration with Capella University in 2019 and graduated the FBI National Academy in December 2021. Little note, all the speakers said that they were grateful to have served or are serving the Henderson community and are proud to be residents. Now I get to be quiet and let Bob take over. Would you hand down the microphone? Press it until you get a light on the bottom.
There you go. It's on.
That should be on.
There it is.
Good.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm Bob Blankenship, and the reason I'm talking first is because I'm probably not the oldest in the room, but I also probably am the oldest in this valley. I came here in 1943 as a little tyke. My dad and my uncles started working in this area. Like I said, he came out in 1942 and sit for us in 1943. Henderson wasn't here yet. We lived at Railroad Pass. There used to be quite a community there, and there was quite a few people still living there when I was living there. I lived there for about 2 years. My dad was lucky. He got a 3-room cabin covered with tar paper, no air conditioning, no water, you know. Our heat was a Franklin stove. That's also where my mom cooked. And we had an oak ice chest. the Railroad Pass Casino had an ice house, and so we got ice delivered regularly, so we were pretty happy that way. Water had to be carried in a 55-gallon drum from Boulder City. My dad always complained about 50 cents for a drum of water. That was just ridiculous back in those days, you know. Anyway, 1943 was also the time when Patton's Third Army was stationed in Boulder City, and I can remember some of the experiences I had with the soldiers. As one example was the fact that a tank pulled right up in front of our house was taking pictures of me. I was a tyke, I had a tricycle, but since I rode it on the hard desert pan, the rubbers had come off all of them, so I had just metal rims. And he was taking pictures. Of course, my mom had to run out with her Kodak and take pictures of the tank. And a good event was the fact that the guy tossed both my mom and me a Hershey bar. I found out that the soldiers were good for Hershey bars. So back in those days, they were doing maneuvers all over where Henderson is now, both infantry and the tanks. They would plant these little explosive devices called bouncing betties that were, if the soldier stepped on them, a cherry bomb would pop up about 3 feet and explode. And it was the things that all the kids in Railroad Pass just loved to go find those and play with them, you know. But anyway, my one uncle was living in the Tent City, which is basically a little bit north of where Lake Mead Drive and Boulder Highway. Boulder Highway at that time was a narrow 2-lane road. And the soldiers were protecting the dam and doing maneuvers before they got shipped out to Africa. The thing that I can remember most, about every 100 yards, they had a machine gun nest on the road. And if I could avoid my mother long enough to go across the street to where the machine gun nest was, I could get a Hershey bar. So the city didn't have any buildings at all at that time. It was a tent city, and it was down in the area about where Lake Mead Drive and Boulder Highway is, a little past Lake Mead Drive. And I had an uncle and aunt who were living there. They didn't have any power and stuff like that, but they did have a water tower that set up a shower for the people and an area to wash your clothes. The rest was outhouses. So it was pretty primitive living there when Henderson's being built. I remember my mother got sick and had to go in the hospital, and we got to go down to stay in a hotel in Pittman. Pittman was just a small town then. It was not part of Henderson. It was there before Henderson. And they had some apartments there, little type that was just a little cabin, and you park beside it. But they had something miracle there. They had a cold water faucet outside of the cabin so you could get some water. Of course, they had outhouses also. My dad would get crazy mad at me because I would turn on that faucet and watch it run, because it was like a miracle to me and get water like that. So that's kind of primitive living that we had in those days. My one uncle that lived in the tent city, he was working on the water line, the 40-inch pipe that they were bringing in from the dam area from Lake Mead. My other uncle, who was my dad's brother, he was working, hauling the materials to rig all the power lines that was coming to Henderson. They were primarily working on the plant sites because they were going to build a defense. We were a secret defense plant area. Nobody knew about us except everybody that lived there. And they made the materials there that when they finished building it, that was the explosives that they used and the incendiary bombs that maybe some of you remember the bombing of Dresden in Germany and the bombing of Tokyo when they burned them down. That's where the bombs came from, Henderson, and that's why we were a secret town. There was rumors, I think you're going to speak about something like that, or your book does, that the way our streets were located and arranged, that they thought they were designed to discourage the enemy when they came and took over. They were quite worried about the enemy coming in to the United States. We were caught pretty well short, I guess. I was such a youngster, none of that bothered me too much, except that I knew that all my mother's brothers were now in the Army, or one was in the Navy. So when they finally, the first buildings they built were the Victory Village and the Carver Park areas. Now these were block buildings, and they were like fourplexes. They had 2 bedrooms, and they had a 1-bedroom apartments you could get, depending on the size of your family. My dad finally got us out of Railroad Pass, and we moved into Victory Village when it was completed. They still had some for the bachelor quarters. They had like barracks that were in there, and they weren't built into the 4 units like the ones we lived in. The people that lived in Victory Village and Carver Park would have to walk up to either the administration building in Victory Village to see a movie while they were constructing the movie house in Henderson, and the fire station that I eventually went to work on. But Henderson only had about 920, maybe 930 wooden structure buildings of the original townsite houses. So when I joined the fire department, it was still a fairly small town. We'd had what they called Track 2 built, which was above the townsite houses. Our first home, when my dad could move in, we moved into number 2 Basic Road. And it was a 2-bedroom. My mother wanted a 3-bedroom, so we moved to 319 10th Street. Now the schools in Henderson were all located where the city hall is now. We had the high school. We even had a football field where they always had the fireworks and stuff. The elementary and mid school and high school were all in that same spot. The streets weren't paved. They were dirt. There was no curbs. The only place that had sidewalks was around the downtown area called Market Street, where the Foodlands store was, the Van Bailey shoe store, and some of the other shops, the dress shops and stuff like that. And Mayor Burns had a little shop that he sold candy, newspapers, any type of condiments and stuff like that, was across from the theater. It turned out to be quite a problem because it was the only place that had sidewalks, and all those kids had roller skates. So that was the only place you could go and roller skate. I remember the firemen used to yell at us for blocking the entrance to the exits of the fire department. So, and anyway, it was a fun time living there. You got to know just about everybody in town because we were a small community. And after the war ended, the Ford companies that built the plants started selling them off. My father was lucky enough, he went to work for Stauffer Chemical, which was one of the largest chemical plants at that time. My mom worked in the cafeteria there during the war and even after the war ended. She went on to be a dietitian, became a dietitian at Sunrise Hospital. The fact that the police department at the time was just a small shed. I mean, I don't think it had 2 rooms. It was so small. And 1 police car. That's the way it was then. Even in Las Vegas, they were the same way. They were quite antiquated. The police cars didn't have radios. So the way they would announce the guys to come in to see what the problem was so they could respond, they would turn a red light on top of the El Cortez, which was the highest building in town at that time. So the police car would patrol car would go in to the headquarters, find out what the problem was, and then go out to it. So that's kind of like the way it was then. When I joined the fire department, it was in 1963. I'd worked at the plant, Titanium Metals, right after I got out of high school. Matter of fact, I had to be let off time from work to go back for my graduation ceremony for high school. I was lucky enough to work on a research team that we developed the heat shields for the Mercury and Gemini capsules. So I went from kind of a rocket science to a fire science. I took the test in 2 places, Las Vegas and Henderson. I was called into Henderson on the police department. My brother was a sergeant on the police department. So I used to go on a ride along with him, and I thought that'd be a great job for me because the lab work that I was doing at the time was boring. Anyway, he tried to tell me not to go for the fire department because fire department was dangerous. So the police department and the firemen were in the same building, that building on Atlantic Street. We shared it with the police department, the detective, the jail, and prisoners. And we had a little cubicle outside on what we call the app floor where we parked the fire truck and the ambulance. We had to share the cooking with the prisoners. So that the police and the firemen, we got along pretty good, except we'd always pull pranks on each other. One of the best pranks I think the police officers did to us is about 1 o'clock in the morning, when we were sleeping, they would come in and pour water in our fire boots, then ring the alarm. Of course, we would get back to them, of course. But that was kind of the way it was. We were comrades. We were both doing jobs that were important. We knew they were important, but Henderson was a small town. We didn't have very many fires. Matter of fact, I had to go to 2 fires and pull the hose before I was ever trained how to pull the hose. That's the way it was in those days. I was on the department about 6 months, and the chief noticed that I was always had my nose in a book, and the book's about fire science, and I borrow books from his library and stuff like that. So we're going to come up with the idea that we're going to put lieutenants because they opened the 2nd station down in Pittman. And we usually had 3 men on duty at the station, but then when we opened that new fire station, we were only working a very small complement of people. When I joined the fire department, there was only 8 members, including the chief. And we were manning 2 fire trucks. The one in Pittman usually only had 1 man working there. So he would have to drive to the fire, park his truck, put it in pump gear, pull the hose, come back and charge the hoses, then fight the fire. And I did that several times back in that day. When we got a few people later, we finally got 3 people on the truck. And when I joined the fire department, we had an ambulance, which was I think it was a 56 Ford panel wagon. And the only training we had was the Red Cross first aid book. We were kind of in competition with the mortuary, I think, because of our poor training at the time. But we tried our best. And it was a 1-man ambulance. When I go out on an ambulance call, I would have to get either a police officer or a citizen to help me load the people in the ambulance. That's the way it was in Henderson years ago. But we finally divided when they started building the city hall, and a person, I think it was Mr. Hunt from Utah, it was a billionaire, that gave money to build the police station and to jail, which was a wonderful thing because we were too crowded in that place anyway. And we had to remodel the fire station, and we always did all the work ourselves, all the painting, repairing, and do anything like that. But anyway, when I'd been on the department about 6 months, the chief told me, he says, I'm coming for a lieutenant's test. And I says, I would like you to take that test, but you know, I couldn't make you a lieutenant because you haven't been here long enough. I said, yeah, I can understand that. Well, it comes out I was the only one that passed the test out of 5 people that took the test. We had a new city manager then. I can't remember his name, but he was kind of upset because no one passed the lieutenant's test. And he says, if this kid is so good, you ought to make him your training officer. I said, you can't make me a training officer. I've only been here 6 months. They tried it. I said, but they wanted me to be a fire training officer, but I wasn't over in rank of a captain. I said, how can I tell the captains that we're going to go out and train? It didn't work. The first day I went back and told the chief, says, this is not going to work. Because my captains, they were all World War II vets. My first captain I worked for was Captain John Farnsworth, and he was a member of the 101st Airborne that went into Normandy and Market Garden and was one of the guys that liberated Germany's Eagle's Nest, the Nazis, Hitler's place that he would love to go and spend his vacations at. Even had a gold elevator that went to the top of it, the way I was told. But if any of you ever saw that movie series called Band of Brothers, there was a part in there that mentioned him because he had liberated one of these Belgian Lipsenzinger, I think that's the word, horses. So he was a messenger going from headquarters back to the different units, riding that horse. He was a cowboy. And in the movie, they showed him part and said, Sergeant Farnsworth, sir, says, I'm working as a messenger. And he had that white horse. And that was the story he told us. That because we'd seen those horses on TV, and he told us about how he rode one when he was in the war. But that's the type of people that were my captains. And they jumped out of airplanes, perfectly good planes, into combat. And now they were just working on a little town fire department. As the town grew, I finally made it to training officer. And in the years, I think it was in the 70s, we went, the council decided they wanted to go to what they call public safety, where they combine the police and the fire department. The cops didn't want to be firemen, and the firemen didn't want to be cops. Even though we got along pretty good with each other, other than pulling pranks on each other and trying to beat them at the annual softball game. I was the only one that was cross-trained to be a police officer. I was also the arson investigator. Matter of fact, I had several hats. I was the fire inspector, the arson investigator, the training officer, whatever they wanted. But it bumped me up to basically deputy chief on the department because the director of public safety, he had 5 horns on his badge. Dale Starr, my fire chief, had 4 horns on his star, and I had 3 horns on my star. And I was working basically doing about everything they wanted done. I was the one that they called. I had to wear so many hats. We were so small in manhood, man training, that we just couldn't hardly keep together. A good fire department, a lot of work. I was okay. So they took all right. Anyway, in the 80s, late 80s, I went back, left administration, and went back to combat on the field. Now, the one thing I want to say, and I need to say it before I quit. Uh, fire people and police officers make a big difference. People that don't know how much difference one man can make. Every one of us has had experiences. Now, I got a man sitting here right next to me that made a big difference one time. Any of you remember the MGM fire? Yeah. Well, I was acting chief, and on my way to work, I saw the smoke. I knew what it was. I called down, radio down, and have Don take a fire truck and an ambulance into the MGM fire. I followed him shortly after I told him to start calling back our people. 75% of the Henderson Fire Department was there. When we got there, fire was something I've never seen before in my life. Fire was shooting out of places that looked like flamethrowers. And I'm talking about large distance. You've all been to these parking areas where they have the valet and pass-through lane and stuff like that. Fire was shooting out of the casino all across all those lanes about 70 or 80 feet. That's how much flame was coming out. Don got there and there was no command post, so he decided he had to do something, and he decided he saw a fire coming out of the side of the building, which happened to be the elevator lobby, and he attacked that. He pulled a 2.5-inch hose, took his men in. The fire was so hot it drove them back, so they brought in a second 2.5-inch hose. Now, a 2.5 hose puts a ton of water a minute on a fire. So he had 2 tons of water a minute going into that blaze to make entry into an elevator lobby. When they got inside, the cables were already stretching and the cars were starting to fall. But he knocked it down. Now, the climax of this is the fact that the day after the fire, the chief of Clark County called me and said, I want to come out and thank everyone on your department. I want to go to all 3 shifts and say thank you. And he told me that if Don Griffey hadn't done what he did at that elevator tower, we estimate that we would, instead of 86 people, we would have lost 3,000 people because he kept the fire from going up to all the floors. And that one included several firefighters' deaths. So anyway.
Thank you. So let me give you a little history. Let's go by the fire department. Chief Richards was the first fire chief when I hired on. So in 1969, the firefighters used to work. They were short manpower. The union was formed in 1969, and the first thing they did is they bargained for 3 new members. My number, 22. I will always remember it. When I'm talking about 22, there were 21 guys on the department the day I hired on. I came on as 22, got hired on July 6th, and the only reason I started on July 6th in those days, July 4th was on a Sunday, and the holiday was scored on Monday, and I got to start on Tuesday. My best friend, if you talked about a company I owned, DNR Hydrant, my business was called Don and Ray. Ray was my partner. He was my captain. And he picked me out of the interview. So let me tell you a little bit about my interview. I got hired. I took the test. I worked for the Bureau of Reclamation on June 8th, and they advertised for the police and fire tests. I took both of them. I came out number 1 on both tests. My grandmother passed away. I was down in California. My wife called me and said, hey, you got to be back here on Monday. You had an interview for the fire department. I walked in on Monday morning, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And I can always remember the 3 people doing my interview. And the first thing when I got through, the chief says, you're starting next week. And I turned around and I said, I can't. He goes, what? I can't. I work for the Bureau of Reclamation. I was raised by my dad that when you quit a job, you had to give 2-week notice. You just didn't quit that day, start. So he turns around and Hugus turns around and he says, well, I'm on first shift in July and that's the next hire. You're working for me, and that's how I got hired. The best thing ever happened to me, because when you got your raises, they always started on July 1st. So I always got the raises when they came up for the rest of my career. Don Richards was a good man. I really liked him. Unfortunately, he could be a little tyrant sometimes at the work. Before I got long, I became the bargaining member of the union. And I can go on through all the things that went through. I hired on, we made $700 a month for a family of 4. That's what I had. Actually, they told me you get hired at $750 a month, but while you're on probation, we take $50 back, and then when you get off probation, we give you that $50 raise back. So we did that. And then the next year, the city manager, and I was trying to think of his name, I guess Don Dawson. He comes out and he says, I'm giving everybody $1 a raise an hour. And that's what all the firemen, you don't think it didn't cause problems? It did, because the captains, we firemen got $1 raise and the captains got it, but they didn't make much more. So it became a big argument about it, stuff like that, just to let you know. There's many things I could tell you about the bargaining unit. And at that time, the firefighters were the only bargaining unit in the city. And we had George Price was our president of our local, and then Lou Banning became, and we brought a member in from the International Firefighters to help negotiate our contract. And we got a cost of living clause in our contract. We were guaranteed at least 2.5% minimum, or the cost of living, every 6 months. That's how we did for like 5 years. We didn't have to come back to the table. We did some things. We come in and said we want change in working conditions, and we worked at the chief to work things out. And that's how it is. And then in 1974, 75, when Nixon changed the price, he put the embargo on fuel, the cost of living went up astronomical. And it turned around and the cost of living was 7.5%. Don Dawson called all the employees up and says, has you talked about the old gymnasium that was City Hall? We went in there, and if all the employees showed up, workers sat here, firefighters sat here, police sat there, secretary sat there. We sat in our different groups, and I was the spokesman for the firefighters. Don Dawson says, we've been giving you raises every year for the firefighters. If the firefighters got a costume, we give it to you. We can't afford to give you 7.5% raise. But if the firefighters will take 3.5%, we'll give all the employees a 3.5% raise. I had to stand up and I walked down to Mr. Dawson, and we had a little podium sitting out there, and I said, Mr. Dawson, we appreciate it, but we pay union dues, and we negotiated this. We're taking our 7.5%, and we don't care what you give the rest of the employees. That's your business. The rest of the employees did not get a raise for 2 years. We got the 7.5%. The policemen were way behind us. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know, they formed their association, and they became a bargaining unit. And then the Teamsters came in, and they became and that's how everybody started getting their raises back up like that. And that's how it worked over the thing. We negotiated a lot of things, believe me. I became president of local in 1977. And that was, we had been going, and now we'd never been what we call last best offer. And this is part of the contracts that the unions have today. It's called 288. So we went in there, and you have to negotiate different rules and stuff like that. And the city manager at that time was Bob Campbell. And Bob Campbell says, No, and I will always tell you, the attorney for the city is Kent Dawson. And he's a judge today, and he's a very good friend of mine. And we were sitting in the bargaining unit in there, and 4 weeks or 4 months, we hadn't even got to sitting who was going to sit at the table. We found something out. John Marciano was a rookie. Janice Weiss was the human resources. And there was only like 3 people allowed to sit at the table. We sat at the table, came in, and I will tell you something. We found something out about somebody that worked for the city. Long story short, the city goes, we're gonna caucus. We don't want to come back. John Marciano says, Don, you have a contract? I wrote one out and I said, yeah, here, I'll give it to you. And I gave it to him on a Friday. He says, on Monday, we'll meet and we'll talk about it. We came back on Monday, and I will tell you, we got the best contract we ever had in our life at that time. They got a 7.5% raise and paid retirement. That's how it all came about. So that's other than bargaining units. I've bargained many times, but I love my job. I love the Henderson Fire Department. This gentleman here, I will tell you, they started an EMS program. I was the only firefighter on the Henderson Fire Department that never had to be an EMT. But after they started, him and Rex Newell started a program, they came in and they convinced me into it, and I bought into it, and I would decide, hey, I'm going to become an EMT. And I joined we went through, the whole department went through a class. It took us 6 months to get through this EMT course. And that's how then I became the bargaining unit, and I went to the chief and I said, you know what? We're never hiring a firefighter again that isn't an EMT. It was going to be mandatory that the firefighters would have to take school and become an EMT before they could apply for the city of Henderson. They use that today, that same curriculum, just to let you know. My claim to fame is, yeah, I fought the fire at the MGM. Before that MGM fire, some of you will never know that Kingman in 1971 blew up downtown. They called the Henderson Fire Department, and the Chief Richards said, we're sending an engine company over there. We drove over in the Crown, and I don't know if you've ever seen this fire engine. It was open cab. We didn't have a roof on it. And we're driving down across, and my partner on the back of the engine, that was a big Jim Sage. And we got going over there, and if you know, no freeway like it is today, you had to go down around the dam and everything like that. We just come up the other side, and they turned around and said, cancel, you guys go back. We're flying all the injured into Henderson. And we came back, and we got back there. What today is Hyundai, and I forgot who used to own that. It was the mayor, I think, owned it at that time, used to own that car lot in those days. And it was an open field, and they flew all these Hueys in with all the firefighters that got burned in Kingman. Jim Sage and I hauled in a father and son that were burnt black. I mean, they were burnt. And I never forget this, because that father and son held each other and talked the whole way. And I was in the back with them trying to tell them, you guys are going to make it. You're going to make it. 3 days later, they both died. But I would tell you, that was the kind of thing that we did in those days. We as a firefighter didn't support Kingman. We put on, we went up to Boulder City and put on a water fight up there to raise money for them. And we just did stuff like that. The town grew. I would let you know, when my second year on the fire department, my first year on, we had a fireman commit suicide. He was on a crew that repaired fire hydrants. Chief Richards says, Griffey, you're going to go over there, you're going to take his place over there and help those guys out. That was Captain Newell and his crew was the guys that repaired fire hydrants. I went out on a fire hydrant with them, and I says, what in the world are you guys doing? They built this tripod, come along, they used pipe wrenches and hammers and ball peen hammers and took this fire hydrant apart, which is the one he was talking about. They're called Pacific States. And I will tell you, at that time, There were 300 fire hydrants in the city of Henderson. They were all Pacific states but one. And the plant had all Pacific states. So Chief, when I came back and I talked to him, I said, you can't repair fire hydrants like that. He liked what I did, and I said, I've been in a preventive maintenance program. He says, I want you to repair the fire hydrants. You're going to I'm a rookie firefighter. I'm out now telling my crew, hey, we got to go repair a fire hydrant, and we'd go out and do it. So if you meant Bob talked about the first ambulance we had was this old 56 panel Ford wagon. That became my hydrant wagon to go repair fire hydrants. I went out, and after the second year, I came back and I told the chief, I said, Chief, we need to come up with a plan. He says, why? I said, these are the worst fire hydrants in the world. The water here is so hard that the parts in there just can't be made. So I turned around and I said, hey, let's change them out. I went to Public Works and I said, we had 300 fire hydrants in town. I said, let's change out 50 a year. In 3 years or 6 years, we'll have them all done. And they turned around and he said, in 2 years, they decided they were going to do it. And they changed them all out in 2 years. And then that's what I did for years. I repaired fire hydrant until I became a captain. And then I passed it on to this gentleman here. But I will tell you, we repaired the fire hydrants in the whole town. The town grew. It was just as everything. And then we decided, along came as we grew, we were going to the public safety fire department thing. I was president of the local. We fought that, and Bob Campbell, the council said, we're not going with it. And then we turned around and put the chiefs back as fire chiefs. And Selmo ended up down the line becoming city manager for a while. And that's what happened in there. So that's how we got back to police and fire. Then the MGM fire came along. I was on the MGM fire. That was, you'll never forget it, November 20th, 1980. 1981, we had the Hilton fire. We also went out, the same guys on duty went into that and fought the Hilton fire out there. Yeah, and just to tell you, it went along. Then we went along, and then as we're growing along, and the council is changing along that, and Andy Hafen became a councilman at that time. And then along comes PepCon. Well, we started realizing Rex Newell was the EMS coordinator. He decides he wants to retire. The fire chief, Dale Stark, comes to me and says, hey, I'd like you to be the EMS coordinator for the city of Henderson. So I took it over, and I was in charge of all the training of all the guys, and I ran the program. And then the day of PepCon, we were meeting, having lunch with the mayor and one of the councilmen was supposed to have lunch with us. The alarm goes off and it comes up and, hey, PepCon's on fire. We didn't know a damn thing about PepCon, in case you didn't know that. That was in the county. We didn't know anything about it. What's that? I'm gonna move and change in a minute. Anyway, long story short is PepCon comes, we go. Yes, I was on the ladder truck company at Ground Zero. It blew. I did make a change the chief's command. And he said, hey, I want you to go into PepCon. I said, no. As I said, no, I said, I'm going over to protect the people at the marshmallow plant because there was kids working there. And I thought that was my choice. And just as I said that on the radio, the place blew up like that. I will tell you, it blew our windows out on both my truck, and the second one came out. And if you had vehicles in those days, they were crushed down to the ground. I got out of my truck, told my engineer, hey, we need to get out of this place. Let's back out. And I was standing out on the ground when the second explosion happens. And the next thing I know, I could tell you, I was laying on the bed of that truck. And my engineer was looking for me. And he jumps out and he comes up, and I was stuck because my backpack the air pack was stuck in the bed of the hose rack there, and he had to pull me out to get me out. And I said, let's get out of here. And that's what we did. And we moved out. And that's the rest of the day was we spent like that. By the end of the day, that night, I was ended up in the hospital because I had glass in my eyes, and that was it. Next, I went to the council and said, hey, we need to go to paramedics. They sent me to Washington, D.C. to take a class about how to make a paramedic program. It was the best thing I ever did. I went back there. My roommate was a fire captain from L.A. County. And in the class that we were in there, you break up into teams up there. And I got teamed with a firefighter from Connecticut and a team from Florida. If I told you how they ran ambulance services in those days, it would shock you. I couldn't believe it. But we sat down and wrote a program. And the program we designed was that, hey, we need to put a paramedic on every engine and 2 paramedics in an ambulance. That was what I wrote. The 3 of us got a letter, and the teacher from Connecticut asked us if he could publish that and we signed off on it just like it did here. And that has now become the norm throughout the United States, just about. And I came back here and I went to the council and I turned around and I said, hey, this is the program I'd like to do. And they let me, we called it handpick. I handpicked the first 4 paramedics. We did make them tests, but I will get over it. And I'm going to leave here in just a minute. But those 4 paramedics, 3 of those 4 paramedics are now fire chiefs for different departments in the United States. My other claim to fame is, I will tell you, I have worked with every fire chief in the city of Henderson, even today, or those fire chiefs worked for me, including Mr. Vivier.
Before you get started, Frank, it's already 7:30. Our panelists, we've still got 5 to go. We're going to have to be a little shorter. Just have to say that. I know that you were, but we didn't get that through to everybody. So I'm sure that everybody wants to be here until midnight, but just having to be the hard roads here. So thank you, Frank. I'll let you go.
Frank Belger, Henderson Fire, 1974. Thank you. When I came on, I was a new kid, and these older gentlemen had paved the way for us, but there was 28 on the fire department when I hired on. 24 combat, the rest was secretary, chief. Blankenship was the training officer, battalion chief. And the one who really run it was Greta Lewis. She was the chief. And she was also the secretary. But when I took the job, I wanted to be a fireman. I thought that would be something that would be fulfilling to me personally. I'd been a meat cutter, full 4-year journeyman meat cutter. I took an $800 a month cut and pay to be a fireman. I had no idea what the job meant or what I was getting into. I walked in the main station the first day, Panama and Atlantic, and here I am. Okay, well, this is what, I went through a pile of stuff and they found some turnouts for me. Okay, what do I do with these? And that was pretty much my first day. It was just indoctrination, which was good, but I had no idea. It took me 3 days to put a badge on me. I was crushed about that. I wanted that badge right away, you know. But my medical experience was a lifeguard, Red Cross first aid. First week on the fire department, they throw me in the back of the ambulance and say, go save a life. Now, Henderson was 17,500 population when I hired on the fire department. Boulder Highway was 4 lanes, and we had some pretty good wrecks on there. And Lake Mead, going to the lake, we had some pretty good wrecks there too. But, and then along with the medical stuff in the homes and stuff like that, I was so ill-equipped, I couldn't believe it. I was overwhelmed. But we worked with these World War II vets, and when you come back to the station, you didn't say, God, I lost one. You didn't dare say a word, because these guys would look at you like, are you full of shit? Come on, this is your job. So I was enrolled in the second paramedics or EMT school in Clark County. After I got that, it made me a little more comfortable. I could at least put bandages on people. And then the EMT instructor program came in. I took that. I took some other programs, and I became very confident on what I could do. And Bob Blankenship, our training officer, he had the vision enough that the state of Nevada come out with modules. And these modules were independent ones. One would be IV therapy, one would be innovation therapy, one would be mass trousers, and that sort of thing, until we had 5 different modules. You had to have a local doctor sign off on it, which was Dr. Ravish. And we had a nurse, male nurse at Rose de Lima, Kelly, retired Navy or Air Force, I'm not sure. And he oversaw the program with us. Well, in those years, we were doing a lot of lake stuff, not in depth on the lake, but about Colville, about as far as we would go. And when we left Henderson with 2 people on the ambulance, that left 1 fireman in the station with reserve ambulance. And if a call came in for a second call while we were gone, that fireman would take that, meet a police officer at the scene. The police officer would drive like he was going to Indianapolis 500, and you in the back. Those were some hairy rides, let me tell you. So a couple of years later, the Park Service thought, oh, we have rangers, but we don't have any EMTs, we don't have any medical training on these guys. But Henderson, look at Henderson here, So they bought us our first mod, beautiful mod. But in order to keep the mod, we had to service the lake. So every weekend and a weekday during the summer months, we were out the lake quite a bit. Boat accidents, car wrecks, you name it. I was called one time to go out just past Colville. When I got to the scene of the wreck, it was just this side of Overton. We picked up the people. We went on I-15 and went back to Southern Nevada Memorial Hospital with them. I had over a 200-mile trip that day in an ambulance. Now, that was okay because we were equipped for it and we could give IVs, and it really made a difference in the patients. But one of the funny ones that I had in this mod, it had a 20-gallon fuel tank, and it was good for about 8 miles a gallon, maybe. So if you took it and had a run in the morning, a quarter of a tank, you could leave it sit there. You got a second run, you had to go gas up. So we had got a Saturday morning, we had 2 runs back to back in Henderson. Before I could fuel up, now we got a Colville Bay run. Well, the Rangers knew all of us firemen real well, and they wanted to know us. They liked us. So we were picking up their bodies and getting them the hell out of there. They didn't have to deal with them. So we get in, I'm looking at my gas gauge, I'm going, man, I told my partner, I said, man, this is going to get tight. So I called I got on the radio and I called dispatch. I said, would you call the Park Service and tell them, I don't have the fuel to make this run, a round trip. Okay, we'll pass it on. Well, I had no idea what they were going to do or anything else. Nobody got back to me. We got the people picked up. We're coming back, and we aren't even at Colville yet. And I know I'm sucking on less than a quarter of a tank. And here up the road, I see a tow truck, yellow lights flashing. I see a Ranger car, his red lights are flashing. And I'm driving towards it, and finally the Ranger steps out. His name was Malcolm, big guy. Flags me down, and I pull up there, and I stop right in the middle of the road. And I go to get out to get the gas in. And he goes. So I sit back down and shut the door, and I'm watching him. Well, the tow truck driver's throwing gas in my tank. I can see the gauge coming up. Finally, Malcolm looks at me, and he goes, I never drove an Indy car, but that was as close to an Indy pit stop I ever had. But those were the years you did what you had to do. And a lot of times, one other real quick story, we worked very well with the police department. Tommy Burns and I were both rookies about the same time. And on graveyard shift during the week, you had a sergeant, 2 patrolmen, and a dispatcher. And the dispatcher, when she took her lunch break, the sergeant took the desk. Well, Friday night, Saturday night, Monday night, didn't make a difference. You get a call, oh, there's a guy down in the Alibi Club on Boulder Highway. Well, from Joker's Wild now to Sunset, that was the Pittman Strip. There were more bars per square foot, I think, any place else in the world at that time. So we get down there, and you'd walk in, and you kind of open the door, look, survey the situation over, and here's the guy laying down, and you can tell he's been beat to shit. And you go over and just about to get down to assess him, and then the fight breaks out again. And the one time I can remember vividly, my partner was 6'7", I think, Jim Sage's name, good friend of mine today. We actually fought our way out of that bar. Now, the nice thing about it was they were all drunk and we were sober. I was pretty tough. We get outside, and here comes the first patrolman, and then here comes the sergeant. So they go in. Well, they didn't go in by themselves. We went with them because they needed us as much as we needed them, that type of thing. And they use their billy clubs. I know that's politically incorrect at this time, but at that time they had these attitude correction sticks. And they calmed down the crowd, and then we would get the body and get out of there. And my career, I did the MGM, the Hilton, Kerr-McGee, PepCon. I had a wonderful career. I met a lot of good people, a lot of good firemen, and my friends to this day, even Don. But I must say, it's been, this community has been good to my family and to me. And if I could leave you with one thought, I've worked with these guys for 20 some years, 27 I worked. And recently, Chief Vanier and Chief White before him had a meeting, and they were discussing peer support. And they invited some of us old farts to come in and talk to them and see what we thought. Well, I bought into it. So now I'm back volunteering and peer support to help the younger guys deal with some of the stress and the issues that they might have. Yeah, okay. You guys don't know, but when we started the IV program up, we were the first fire department in the state of Nevada to do it. Frank was the first guy to give an IV on the field. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Why I brought that up is because I'd like to tell you that I worked with the guys in my generation, and now I'm working with these guys that are long, my juniors. Is that better? Okay. They're my junior. But working with these people, I'm going to tell you, you've got the finest fire department in the United States right here in Henderson. They've got the most accreditations of anyone I know of, and I would put them up, man and woman, head to head with anybody else. This department you can be proud of, because these people care about what they do. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this. Thank you.
I'll keep it short. Frank, thank you for those wonderful things. My name is Scott Bevere. I have the privilege of serving as the 12th Fire Chief for the city of Henderson. And I did get a chance to work with Engineer Belger at the time and Captain Griffey quite a while. I was in his station when he was the fire captain, and we still get a chance. I didn't get a chance to ever work with Battalion Chief Blankenship, but those stories sound great. Keep it real quick. I also, like you said, I'm so fortunate to be on this department. I am a local boy, born and raised in Henderson, Nevada. I grew up on Major and then in Villahermosa and then in Mission Hills. Went to Fay Galloway, Burkholder, and Basic High School. My dad was a police officer for Metro, and that's what I thought I wanted to be. And so when I was 17 years old, I came home from school with an application to be basically like a cadet. And my dad was so proud of me, and he said, let's go to lunch, son, and we'll talk about this. Well, this was back when where we're at now. College didn't go all the way through. We didn't have the freeway, so we lived in Mission Hills. We came down Arrowhead, and we turned, and we were going to a place where there was no restaurants. And he stopped at Station 81, which is at College and Horizon. We pulled into the parking lot, and he took me to the door. And at that time, this was 1992, he said, hey, I'd like you to meet a firefighter who's a friend of mine. And this firefighter is our current deputy fire chief, Chief Tim McKeever. He was a firefighter at that point. My dad and him had worked together on search and rescue. And he said, Scott, this is Tim, and you can come home when you don't want to be a police officer anymore. And he left. So he left me at the fire station. I was with firefighter McKeever for about 4 hours. And the stories he told, much like this, I fell in love with the career. I immediately enrolled in EMT school when I was in high school. When I graduated, I had a job at Mercy Ambulance 5 days later. I've been in EMS now for 30 years. I was hired by the Henderson Fire Department in 2000, and it is just pure God's blessings that I get a chance to be here. These men that came before me, I'm standing on their shoulders. The department is what it is because of all the efforts that they put into making it great. And I love hearing the stories, but I'm going to end it there. It is my pleasure to serve as your current fire chief, and I can't wait to see where the future takes us.
Thanks, Chief. These firemen are long-winded. Whoa, man. Oh, you were almost there. So I hired on in 1974. I was 21 years old. I was going to UNLV, and my experience was I was a lifeguard at the Riviera Hotel, which, by the way, was the best job I ever had. But so when I hired on, Jim was captain, and he looked at me, took one look at me, and said, "You're going to the Metro Academy because you know nothing." And I did know nothing. So, but I started out. Griffey was talking about, I forgot what he said, 700 and something a month. But I always remember, I still have my pay stub. I made $888 a month. So when you make $888 a month, you're single, you're 21. What do? You buy a motorcycle. So I was living in hog heaven. I had no responsibilities. Yeah, literally. But like Frank said, we worked great with the fire department. We would call them out when we had a fight and we needed some fighters. And usually it was Frank and Larry Sullivan because they loved to rumble, and they came out. And Frank probably remembers the one shooting down on Wyoming Street where we had to fight our way in and fight our way out to get the victim. You remember that one, Frank? And Frank had to come get me. He goes, "Tommy, stop that guy," which was one of our officers was beating somebody with a flashlight because we couldn't control the crowd. And because he didn't want to take another person to the hospital. They only had one ambulance there. But yeah, the fire department, if they, we would call them for backup. I mean, like Frank said, it was 3 or 4 guys working and a dispatcher. And so it was a small town and I think when I hired on, we had 30 people. And it was, but it was a lot of fun. And there was a lot of camaraderie with the fire department. And Valerie told me I should think of a funny story to tell, but there's a camera roll and I had to sign a thing. So my list got very short quickly. But I will tell one funny story at my own expense, because people asked me, were you ever around any gunshots? I said, well, just one. And that was when I fired my gun. And what I was doing is we had arrested a person for DUI, and we got into a tussle with him. And so when we got to jail, we had gun lockers, and I go to put my gun in the locker, and I noticed that the safety strap, as a revolver, was unstrapped, and I didn't realize it was cocked. I pulled the gun out, and wham!
down, off it goes, blows out the holster. You know, I'm looking to see if I'm hit. Dispatcher came running down. Pull your pants down. Pull your pants down. She got to see my cheeks. She goes, no, it's just red. You're fine. Okay, thank you very much. But as Jim remembers, the story doesn't end there. So I tell the sergeant the next morning my accidental discharge. He tells the lieutenant. They're in the office. He says, well, how did it happen? So he takes out his revolver, dumps the bullets, sets them down, puts the gun in his holster. He says, Burns says it went like this. When he put his finger there, wham! The gun goes off. He goes, yeah, well, that's how it happened. So they look at the desk and it, 1, 2, 3, 5 bullets, not 6. And the one they left in the chamber ended up right in the right spot to fire off a round. And then Jim nicely gave us, I think, 2 weeks on the beach. And I mean, 2 days on the beach, not 2 weeks. Gave us 2 days on the beach, and that was that. But that was my funny story that I can tell in mixed company. Also, what they were talking about real quick is we also had a year after PepCon, we had Pioneer Chemical, which was quite the fiasco for us because we moved the command post 3 times, Frank, or 2 times, something like that, because the chlorine cloud kept floating. And so I left the command post. We had a Burkholder. We were moving it, went home, told my wife, pack up our baby, take the back road, which was Gibson, I think, somewhere, and go to our mom's house in Las Vegas. Don't go to Boulder Highway because that cloud was floating across the highway. So that was interesting times also. But thank you for coming out. And like I said, it's I thought Bob was going to give you his 45-minute history, but I thought I'd just share a little bit.
My name is Jim Goff, and I'm an alcoholic. I just trying to wake up the crowd here. I joined the Henderson Police Department as a reserve officer making 50 cents an hour to cover our uniform cleaning in 1994 in January. And 6 months later, Don Dawson, the city manager, found enough money to hire 6 additional police officers. And I was one of them. I have to tell you, first day on the job, I'd been working with the reserves. We'd like to work on Friday night because that's when all the action was, when you was a reserve. So we would all try to, there's about 15 of us reserves at the time. We'd all try to work Friday night. Sometimes you'd see a police car go down the street with 4 policemen in it. But it was hard to get in there on Friday night. But my first day on the police department, the wife's uncle was already on the police department. His name was George Liggett. And he talked me into joining the reserves and ended up on the police department. And we only had 1 car. We lived down below Henderson, Rose de Lima Hospital. And I worked day shift with the training officer, Walt Zarodny. I was with Walt for about 6 months. I was a slow learner. And so was Walt. But it worked out. We had a call. He was giving me a ride home. And we got about to the El Dorado. And we get a call, a waitress seen a guy sitting alone in a booth, and he was writing a suicide note. So they dispatched us to that call. George, senior officer, he walked through the casino, and it was dinner time, 4:30, 5 o'clock. The restaurant was packed. I cut through the bar, and I come up behind the officer, the fella in the bar, and he's sitting in his booth, and he's got papers all over the booth, coffee spilled all over, and he's crying. And Liggett walked up right to the table, and he said, "Sir, I'd like to talk to you outside." And the guy said, "What do you want?" He'd been drinking. He says, I'd like you to follow me outside. We need to talk to you. The guy says, well, let me pay my bill. Then he was sitting in a booth and he reached in his pocket like this. And I heard a click. I hit him with everything I could in the back of the head. The gun went off in his pocket and through his leg. He had a over and under Derringer. He shot himself in the leg. People were diving under tables. We finally got him to the hospital, got him arrested, and got him treated. I went home and I told the wife, you know, I don't know if I want to be a policeman. I was only 2 feet away from getting killed. She says, well, why don't you stick with it until you can find something better? Well, 30 years later, I was able to retire as the youngest police officer with 30 years of service, 53 years old. I grew up in Carver Park. It was government housing. We were poor. My dad was a carpenter part-time through the union. He would only bid on the big long-term jobs and pass up everything else. So he'd be out of work for a long time. I remember, this is hard to believe, but finally he was able to pay for a house in Valley View, a 3-bedroom house for $7,900, brand new. Excuse me. We were poor. I remember when a strange car would pull up in the driveway, my mom would send me and my sister out to bark at it. We couldn't afford a dog. And there were several occasions when we would have cereal, and you could go ahead and eat the cereal, but you had to pass the milk down to the next person. We were poor. But the starting pay for the police department at that time was $528 a month. They had just raised it 6 months earlier from $485. Probably the highlight of my career was being nominated to go to the FBI Academy. I went in 1972. And the academy had moved from Washington, D.C. It was at the Marine base at Quantico, Virginia. And if you ever seen the big statue of all the men raising the flag at Iwo Jima, that's in the center roundabout on the Marine base at Quantico. I just have one more thing to say, and I'll leave you with a small joke I heard yesterday on Netflix. Everyone knows who Willie Nelson is. Well, Willie Nelson had a buddy that was the same age, 91 years old. And he was failing in health, and Willie says, you need to get to the doctor. And so he went to the doctor, and the doctor did all kinds of tests and x-rays and CAT scans and everything. He come out and he says, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're going to die soon. You just got too many things wrong with you. He says, well, Doc, isn't there anything at all I can do? And he said, well, you might try mud baths 3 days a week. And the guy says, well, will it help? He says, no, but you'll get used to the dirt. I'm honored to be here tonight and share these. And now I'll hand it over to a lady I just met today. And she is also a graduate of the FBI Academy. Thank you for attending.
Well, I definitely don't have jokes like that, but those are some great jokes you just told. So I'm Holly Chadwick. I'm your police chief. I'm grateful to be here. I've been in service for our Henderson Police Department for 23 years now. I grew up in Las Vegas. Clark High School, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Those were my college stomping grounds. And I remember growing up, we used to think it was fun to go across town to Henderson and go to Ethel M Chocolate Factory. So that was like a good thing that we remember as kids. Now looking at Henderson, we have grown exponentially. I can tell you, I moved away after college and 9/11 happened, and that's what brought me back home. I wanted to serve my community. At the time, because I grew up in Vegas, I looked at Metro. They had a hiring freeze for some reason, and Henderson did not, and I had friends working for Henderson. So I did a ride along. I was hooked. I live in Henderson now. I'm your police chief. I love being here. I want you to know how much your department has grown. We started in 1953, was your formalized police department with we were told, a borrowed police car and a few officers, and now we're in our 71st year. You now have 463 sworn officers that patrol the streets for you. You have another 110 sworn in your jail. You have 260 professional staff. You have our own dispatch center that does both fire and policing dispatch for just Henderson. That's how focused we are on the safety of Henderson. You have your own crime lab. You have your own animal shelter. We are very, very involved, and that's a credit to and a testament to everyone who has come before us, not just in public service, but in the leadership, the government. I know we have a former mayor in the room. Everything they've done and the vision they put forth for the Henderson community and the police department, the fire department, we are so grateful that we could continue to serve. You are an absolutely safe community. I know it because I see the work that the men and women put in every day for you. Sometimes people say, well, we never see you guys. And I said, trust me, we're there at night when you're sleeping because that's how we keep you safe. And they say, oh yeah, that makes sense because nothing happens in our neighborhood. I go, yeah, that's right. So we are always here to serve you, and we are so grateful to be part of it. Thank you to the men at this table who have served before us and paved the way. I did hear Tommy Burns stories when I first got hired, but I'll share those later. It's great to put a face with some of those stories. Yeah, the camera's on. I can't talk about it. There's a non-disclosure. But thank you again for being here. Thank you for all you do to support us. And we are so grateful to be part of this Henderson community and be part of the culture for you.
And take credit for all of the girls softball teams that you coached on your own time.
Oh, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I think we still have some time for questions. Okay, I don't see anybody saying no. Okay, so do we have any questions? We've answered it. Oh, okay, we've got one in the back.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Okay.
I started with the state of Nevada in 1975, and we were doing child abuse and neglect investigations here in Henderson. My office was just across the street from the old fire station on Panama Street. And you talk about camaraderie and working together, and I'd just like to say that when we were going out on those child abuse and neglect cases here in Henderson, we had the privilege of being able to contact the Henderson Police Department, who would not only go out with us, but would also go out with the county, who was also doing similar investigations. And so I really appreciated the help that they gave to us. And John Griffey for some pool shooting techniques.
Pool shooting techniques.
Yes.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I don't need that. Anybody that knows me in this room knows I don't need it. My name is Vicki Cameron. I'm the former Animal Control Administrator for the City of Henderson. I'm responsible for that animal shelter, and I'm very proud of it, and I'm proud of the work they're continuing. But the firemen we're talking about, does the police always let you go in first? Well, if they ever went on a call and there was a dog in there, guess who got to go in first?
Any other questions or comments? You seem to have some good comments here. Yes, sir. Right back here in the teal shirt.
I just want to echo the comments about the quality of the fire and the police departments and add that the Henderson, the dispatch center, they are really the unsung heroes because they are working behind the scenes and they are the first to interact with the people who call, and many times they don't get the closure of a call that the people on the scene actually get. So the things that they do are really remarkable.
Oh, would you introduce yourself?
Gene Bellin, retired battalion chief.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Vicki Cameron. We just met tonight. I want to thank every one of you. I felt like we had a trip down memory lane, and my father was the first fire chief in Henderson, Don Richards. And it was joyful. Every one of you, thank you so much. And God bless every one of you.
He was a good boss.
Oh, thank you. He was a good dad.
Well, that's a good thing also. Anything else? Otherwise, I think we had a great panel tonight.